Welcome to Influential Entrepreneurs, bringing you interviews with elite business leaders and experts, sharing tips and strategies for elevating your business to the next level. Here's your host, Mike Saunders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Influential Entrepreneurs. This is Mike Saunders, the Authority Positioning Coach. Today we have with us Guillaume Wiatr, who is a strategy consultant and leadership coach. Guillaume, welcome to the program.
Mike, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Are you going to make me an authority today?
Well, I believe you already are one, and we're just going to talk about your authority that you have and the expertise that you have. And I feel like I'm already an authority in pronouncing a French name like that. So thanks for your pre-coaching. So thank you. Well, give us a little bit of your background, Guillaume, and what your entrepreneurial journey has been like to this point.
Well, Mike, let's start here. I'm French. I'm in Seattle. What am I doing here in Seattle? In fact, this was one of the first questions I was getting when I moved to Seattle in 2008. I am a serial entrepreneur. And I've been doing consulting for over 20 years. My company is called MetaHelm, and what MetaHelm does is that we help CEOs, founders, executive business leaders build a strategic narrative. We help them do that to help them align people and accelerate the adoption of their product. I have so this is a boutique, consulting firm here in Seattle. I started working with startups with many different kinds of companies back around 99, 2000. And I've never really stopped doing that, except I moved here because I'm married to a U.S. citizen now. And I have to say that being in Seattle has brought so many opportunities. This is such a place where entrepreneurship is really thriving, as most people know, and not just in tech, in many different industries. Sure.
Yeah, I love the kind of the approach that you take with that strategic narrative. I like how that sounds. So am I correct in thinking that is kind of like telling the story of the brand without sounding boring, but making it come to life?
It's a good start, but actually I make a difference between story and narrative, Mike, and most people don't. And you could hear it in all, every day in our business conversations say, oh yeah, we have to tell our narrative. Yeah, we should, focus on our story. And people kind of use that as synonym words, but here's the difference. People will buy a story, but people will almost die for a narrative. And what I mean by this is that storytelling has been, until today, really considered something that marketing does, that sales does. So we hear about, story selling, story branding, and so on. And for sure, that's a good start. I mean, we all love a good story. Everything sells better with a story. But what I'm seeing and what I've been working on for now over a decade is, why do we have so many books on storytelling, for instance, and why do we still have so many companies with a bad story? Yeah. And I did some research, interviewed hundreds of business leaders. I practice this every day and came down to the conclusion that companies that are successful have a narrative. And narrative conveys a point of view. It's differentiating. It aligns people around a cause and a purpose. And so you can tell all the stories you want. If you don't have a narrative, it's not going to cut through the noise.
Yeah. And I like the concept of a strategic narrative. So you might think of like, oh, our narrative is, and then they'll mention it or type it out or write it out. But if it's not strategic, if it's not leading somewhere, then it's not really an effective narrative, right?
Well, you're spot on, Mike. And so typically, when I start chatting with people, I draw this. I have a diagram that I show them, and on the left of this diagram, what you see is kind of a bundle of a quagmire, or like a sort of a unorganized system of stories. Say you have your sales deck, you have your website, maybe you have your internal strategy documents, you have your employee guides, and all of these have been kind of developed over time. And as the company grows, it's getting harder to align people, and all of the stories kind of leave, ebb and flows, and it's creating a lot of confusion. what a strategic narrative does is that it reorganizes those stories and filters them through the lens of the future. What do we want to achieve in the future? What are we shooting for? How are we inviting more people to really join us to, say, innovate in our industry, to change the way business is done? This is really what what the difference is. And what I'm seeing is that when I present it this way to business leaders, they go, "Aha, yeah, I've always felt that. I never heard anybody say it like that, but it's really these are our pains." So I work with companies like, large companies like Microsoft, Alaska Airlines, L'Oreal, and these large organizations are really faced with drastic changes in the way they attract people, for instance, or handle their workforce. And they have to keep people focused on very precise goals and so on. For smaller companies, the problem is the same. The scope and the way you address it is different, because obviously there is less people. The stakes are less high. But really, this is a transformation from thinking that a story is the thing that is an afterthought that you do after you've done your strategy and all that, and that you kind of wrap the company with, to the flip of that is, starting with the narrative, like, why does this company even exist today in the world that we live in? And then evolving, all of the processes, the way we work, the marketing, the website, and so on around it.
Yeah. When you were describing that, it makes me think of something else. So let me test my comprehension once again. It sounds to me like a strategic narrative is a very essential tool for both the company internally as well as their clients, customers, prospects, and target audience to understand.
Yes, that's correct. It's inside and outside.
Yeah. And are there nuances of that strategic narrative that need to be changed a little bit if you're speaking of it or presenting it to external versus internal?
Yes, definitely. Say you've got your strategic narrative and really think of it as a as a piece of messaging that rallies everyone, no matter if you're inside or outside, or if it's just a small or a large group. So you start with that. Now, that's the spearhead of, say, you have a presentation to do. That's going to be the spearhead, the beginning part of it. Now, if you're presenting to investors, for instance, the rest of the story, the rest of the message is going to be different than if you're presenting to your employees. Investors want to know, a very specific questions about, the return, the valuation of the company, your go-to-market strategy. But one of the things that I've learned over the year, coaching, I'm a coach at the University of Washington. I've been coaching entrepreneurs for over 10 years now, is that investors will never tell you this, but they will always, between the line, test how able you are, what's your ability to really sell the company to just anyone. How do you mobilize people? And that's the common denominator that you should use everywhere in all of your communication. If you're interviewed on a podcast like this one, or if you're speaking to the press, investors, or internally, and even, one facet that we don't, often talk about is to yourself. I mean, say you founded a company and it's now 10 years down the road, you've been successful. How do you relate to the existence of this company? How do you relate to the narrative that this company, brings to bear in the market? This isn't something that typically founders talk about to just anyone. It's something that they keep for themselves. And it's a crucial process that where people can also feel lonely. And, I see this all the time, Mike. And that's one of the things I've felt myself as an entrepreneur, after founding 3 startups. This is a hard job. We're at it hours and hours a week. And that's where also the narrative shows up. So basically back to your question, there are 4 dimensions, 4 type of audiences. I would say, I just talked about how does the narrative speak to yourself. And then the next one is to your team. To the community is the third one. What I mean by community is your partners, your investors, the outside world. And then, of course, the customer. How does the narrative get people excited about your company? How does this make them see a future? Like, why is your product or service going to transform the way they do something today? And that's the core, that's the core of innovation, for instance.
And it sure seems to me like that strategic narrative is not a fill-in-the-blank one-page document that you take 10 minutes and fill out. So obviously not. But who spearheads a project like that? Because in an organization, it should probably be people from different divisions and departments, and it's a process, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a process. I'm glad you recognize this. I just want to comment quickly on the fill-in-the-blank kind of idea here. I call this the bumper sticker mentality. Old school, traditional way of thinking of, let's get a mission statement. We'll do that over our Christmas, party or leadership retreat, and we have this kind of Mad Lib template that's going to help us. Okay, that does not work. And I know for a fact because years ago I tried to do that with my clients and we failed. So don't do that. So typically what's going to happen is that marketing is often calling to the rescue because they go, okay, we've got to do these campaigns, we've got all these projects, but what do we say? It feels kind of all over the place. And we want to create something that is more connected to the strategy of the company. It is something that should be led by the head of the company, whether you are a CEO, or you call yourself a founder or president or whoever has the helm. That's why my company is called MetaHelm. And then from there, what you need to do is avoid the temptation to just do that in a vacuum, but include people, because the more you involve people in creating the narrative with you, the more they're going to feel like it belongs to them. They're going to become your advocate. They're going to defend it. And obviously, they're going to bring you insight from the field. Say your sales team is going to tell you immediately how this narrative resonates with clients. So this is a process. Some of my clients have been pretty fast at building one. Some others, take more, longer chunk of time because they're bigger companies. They have, different sets of challenges. But it definitely, the projects like this, spread over longer period of times for sure.
Yeah, and also I would suspect that there has to be guidance. In other words, you can't just say, okay, here's what you need. Here's a bullet point list. So do you have any type of coaching or a tool that you work with your clients on to build that strategic narrative?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is not I don't show up just with a blank page. I've got a framework that I call the strategic narrative canvas, and where people can map out the 4 dimensions that I just talked about a few minutes ago. So individual, team, community, and customer. And so the first step is to really teach them how this canvas works. And that's pretty fast. I've got content on videos and it's very well documented. Once we do this, the first phase is going to consist of really kind of taking stock of what's the current narrative in the company, how spread out, how scattered it might be, or actually we'll find out that there are really pockets of very interesting ideas that have not been leveraged. So that's the first thing. And then it's a process of rewriting this narrative. So when I say this, business people tend to not think that they're good writers. So they'll go, oh, I can't write. And I tell them, okay, this isn't the type of writing you're thinking about. We're not writing a novel here. We're not creating an act of literature. We're just supporting our strategic thinking. And I guide them, I coach them through that, and I equip them with a style of for documenting their ideas that is really, really powerful. And then finally, it's activation mode. We look at the different areas where we're going to find return on this investment, and we do a roadmap, we do a plan, and then we activate in the most effective areas we see around it. So it may be in your marketing and maybe in your sales. I mean, that's the first place where people kind of go to. But very often time, Mike, I work on innovation processes, product design, engineering, even HR, finance, where we find really interesting pockets to make the company just work better.
Awesome. Well, Guillaume, it just sounds like this is such a timely need, because in the world of all the distractions and interruptions, messaging is more important than ever, and clarity, and making sure your organization is known for what you do. So if someone is interested in reaching out and connecting with you, what's the best way that they can learn more?
So best way is to go to my website, metahelm.com, meta and helm, simple. And then on my website, I highly recommend you get on my mailing list, because as soon as you get on my mailing list, you're getting a free crash course. It's a 5-email crash course on what is a strategic narrative. So it elaborates on what you've just listened to in this podcast, gives you actionable things you can start doing right away. And you're going to be able to download the strategic narrative canvas that I just mentioned and start familiarizing yourself with it, and then try it out. So metahelm.com and sign up to my list.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Guillaume. It was a pleasure talking with you today.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much. Have a great day and happy holidays.
You've been listening to Influential Entrepreneurs with Mike Saunders. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.influentialentrepreneursradio.com.